everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon on our webinar on FERC Form 552 and the pending Section 5 cases. My name is Dina Wiggins. I'm a partner here with Ballard Spahr, also General Counsel for the Processed Gas Consumers Group. Here with me is Jack Simrani, my colleague here at Ballard Spahr, who also works for the Processed Gas Consumers Group. Before we delve right into the substance, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping matters. In order to try to keep this as interactive as possible, we're keeping the phone lines open. At any time you want to try to interrupt us with a question, please do that. But because the phone lines are going to be open, if you're not speaking or if you don't have an immediate question, if you could mute your line to avoid any sort of the chatter in the background, the people on the keyboards and all of that sort of thing. If you want to ask a question, unmute your line and get our attention, and we will do our best to answer your question. We're going to try to cover a lot of material here today. Also, if you want to ask a question, there should be a small box towards the bottom right-hand side of your screen, and you can type in a question, and Jack and I will endeavor to answer as many of those as we can. If there are questions pending at the end of the webinar, we will do our best, if you'll leave contact information, to get back to each of you individually. So let's jump right in here. What we're going to talk about today is Form 552. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. Hopefully by now everyone is familiar with FERC Form 552. We'll give a little bit of an overview and then talk about some recent developments from the recent FERC conference. Switching gears to a completely different subject, we're going to update you on what's going on with the Section 5 cases, give a little bit of background, a little bit of a status report on what's going on in those cases, and the outlook for the future. As you probably by now knows, FERC has implemented a relatively new Form 552, and Order Number 704 decided that it wanted to get some additional information from market participants, and this was pursuant to authority that was given to FERC in the Energy Policy Act, and it allowed FERC to obtain information from all market participants. And there are likely a number of industrial end users on the line, and yes, this does include you. There were quite a number of companies and some trade associations that fought the inclusion of industrial end users in the realm of possible responders, and FERC said no, we want industrial end users. If you otherwise qualify to fill in this form and submit it to us, we want information from industrial end users. And FERC, in some private conversations that Jack and I have had with FERC staff is puzzled over the fact that not that many industrial end users have in fact submitted Form 552. It's not clear to us what they are going to do about that, and perhaps nothing, but they are curious as to why there are not that many responders on Form 552. This is a non-confidential public form. Anything you say on this form and submit to FERC is something that anybody else can take a look at. I'm not sure why a lot of people would be interested in delving through other people's responses on Form 552, but it is there. And the people who have to file are if you use a blanket sales certificate. And if you use a blanket sales certificate, there is no de minimis exception. You have to file what I call the short form version of this. You have to at least tell FERC that you're making use of a blanket sales certificate. Or if you have reportable physical natural gas purchases or sales equal to or greater than 2.2 million MMBTUs in the reporting year. The reporting year is a calendar year. So if either your sales or purchases hit threshold of 2.2 million MMBTUs in the reporting year, then you have to report both your sales and your purchases. Now, going back to the blanket sales certificate for just a moment, because that has created quite a bit of confusion. Surprise, you may not know this, but I suspect that almost all industrial end users are proud holders of a blanket sales certificate. You may know this, and for many years at FERC, it really didn't make any difference. But a few years ago, FERC made some changes in some of its regulations and some of its, how it interpreted some of its policies. And essentially, if you're making any sale, whether it is for balancing or cash out, you just had to buy too much gas in a month and your plant goes down and you have to sell it. If that gas, before you sold it, went through the hands of a pipeline or an LDC or affiliate of that pipeline or LDC, then you're making a jurisdictional sale, and you're making that sale under a blanket sales certificate. Now, it's called a blanket because you don't have to go to FERC and fill out a piece of paper and get a formal order. If you're making a jurisdictional sale, you're automatically deemed to be making it under a blanket sales certificate. The change that FERC made is as though in this whole chain of title in the natural gas transactions, if anywhere in the chain it with the hands of an LDC or a pipeline or an affiliate, it's the functional equivalent of having injected a jurisdictional virus into the gas. Any transaction from there on out is a jurisdictional transaction. This is important for industrials because with the liquidity in the gas market, it's unlikely that you would know who owned the gas before you owned it. If you're a marketer, and I've talked to marketers about this, a marketer is not going to certify for you who has and has not owned the gas. So the safest thing, and probably the accurate thing, is that if you're making any sort of a sale, it's being under a blanket sales certificate. So you likely at least have to submit, again, what I call the short form version. But the details of what it is that the Commission is looking for, there is a series of detailed questions that you have to fill out and put different kinds of transactions in different kinds of rows. One of the things that has caused, in particular, problems for industrial end users is the item that's number 2 on this slide. That involves balancing, cash out, operational, and in-kind transactions. And for industrial end users, the balancing and cash out transactions are particularly important. I'm going to turn this over to Jack in a moment to talk about what that means and why that's been a problem for industrials. I'll pause for just a second on the first item here that has also caused problems. And this problem is probably not an industrial end user problem. This is usually a producer problem. And FERC has been a little bit hard to read on what it wants done with gas that has not been processed. And that's really what that item number 1 gets to. And so the notices that are surrounding FERC Form 552, the note said that transactions involving unprocessed natural gas are not reportable, and that sounds pretty plain. But there's some other language in the notice that makes that not so plain, and there's an inconsistency apparently in the natural gas producing community as to whether unprocessed gas is reported on this form or not. And that is something, again, that's a producer issue. The producers want this straightened out and want FERC to provide some guidance on this. This was an issue that was discussed recently at a technical conference, and the issue of balancing and cash out gas was also discussed as well. Jack, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The Form 552 data collection and analysis averaged a total of 134.6 hours among the reporting entities that we have polled. The time spent on cash out data was 32% of that, and the time spent on non-cash out data was 68%. However, the total number of purchases and sales, like transactions in general, were rounded to 0 for all those entities that we polled. So they're either actually 0 or were rounded to 0 because their amount compared to the total transactions was insignificant. The cash out purchases and sales as a percentage of gas consumption was 1% and of the total transaction. And so this shows that although the amount of cash out data is insignificant to the total amount of data that is being presented to the to FERC. And although the transactions in number and in significance are insignificant, the amount of effort that goes into pulling the cash out data, processing it, preparing it, getting it, gathering it, and so on, is about a third of the total process. Additionally, when it comes to industrial consumers, they're not in the business of buying and selling gas. They do that as an incident of their core business. So they're not always in a position to automate the process, the process of gathering the information about these transactions, and to find out what transactions are reportable or not, and so on. So all this process can be extremely burdensome to them. And for given the insignificance of the data to FERC and the high burden of the cash out transactions specifically, it is probably a good idea for this requirement to be eliminated. Seems to be receptive to the idea, and although the deadline is July 1 and it's fast approaching, it's still possible that the rules could be changed so that for this next filing in July 1, 2010, the requirement could be dropped.
As you can see on the slide in front of you, PGC did present testimony at the recent conference, and as Jack said, I do think staff is receptive to making some change to cash out. One of the questions that we always get about FERC Form 552 is there any chance that FERC is going to walk away from this and change its mind and then say, okay, we've gotten the data for a year or two, but we don't need it anymore? I don't think so. Unfortunately, I know it's burdensome for a lot of companies to collect all of the data, in particular the cash out data. I don't see any possibility that FERC, at least in the short term, is going to change its mind and decide not to collect this data. I think the best we can hope for is to hopefully tweak this so that it is more user-friendly. And I say that in the context of a form that I understand from many of you is not at all user-friendly. But again, I do think staff is receptive to this. Comments, post-technical conference comments are due tomorrow. PGC will be filing comments, reiterating the points that Jack made, that the collection of this data takes a long time, it's burdensome, and it either is zero or rounds to zero. FERC staff really wants to hear from industrial end users and others, people who are really out there in the field doing this, as to how this is burdensome and why this is burdensome. For staff, I think even for large industrial end users, doesn't quite understand that some things are still time-intensive. I believe that staff, incorrectly as it turns out, in my view, thought that a lot of this data on gas purchases and sales and cash outs and anything else that you do to run your businesses was fairly automated. So really, in order to answer these questions, once you understood what line to put the data on or what bucket to put it in, if you will, really it would require the push of a button to get the answer. And what we've learned is that's not true, and that's what we've been trying to educate FERC staff on. They really are open on this one, so have not filed comments. If you didn't participate in the technical conference, I know the deadline is upon us, but I think they would also be receptive to having some late filed comments if you can't get something into them by tomorrow. But this is something that is of concern to you. I suggest that that you file comments and provide as much detailed information as possible. When we spoke to FERC staff, that's what they're looking for. They need to understand why this is a problem, why it's burdensome, is it on paper, and they also want to know, well, if you did it last year for FERC Form 552, don't have all of your systems in place so that going forward it's not going to be a burden going forward. And again, for many of the clients that Jack and I work with, the answer to that question is no. But if you're able to provide any more details to FERC, that would be extremely helpful.
This is in particular for those consumers where the plants are decentralized and they're in different places, and where every plant has its own processes and procedures to buy and sell gas and so on. In particular for those, it would be helpful to file comments because those can present a completely different picture than the one that FERC staff has. They can tell FERC that to go and get this data, you have access to it is a problem in and of itself, and then to make sense of it, and then to harmonize it, and then to make it uniform, and then to be able to put it in one form, that is a tremendous undertaking. And in many cases where the plants are in different parts of the country, and they have established, and they've been there for a number of years, and they have established their own ways of doing things, the collection of data is particularly burdensome.
We have one question on the screen that someone is saying that in 2008 they were above the threshold, so they filed 552, and in 2009 the volumes were under the threshold, so they're not going to file anything for 09. And the question is that a problem? I don't think that's a problem. It may lead to you getting a question in the form of a phone call from FERC staff saying, I saw that you filed last year and you didn't file this year. What's going on? And I feel that a couple of phone calls along those lines, and my experience has been if you just tell them what happened, I determined I didn't have to file. That's all. I got a couple of phone calls from FERC about some of the clients, people that they knew my clients, and they go, well, I saw this person, this company did file. I checked into it, found out the company done their due diligence and they didn't need to, and that was fine. I don't think yet, at least, that staff is on a particular witch hunt here. Someone else has asked whether the form is even available yet for 2009 data. I believe that the answer to that question is no, and the reason is that FERC has not finalized what it's going to ask for. And I know that might be troublesome to many of you who are probably already at work on filing this, since it is going to be due on July 1. But I believe that FERC was going to hold off posting the 2009 form pending the technical conference, the outcome of the technical conference, and whatever changes they might want to suggest or implement post-technical conference. So I think on this one we need to stay tuned and stand by and see what they decide to do. We're getting ready to switch gears here into the Section 5 cases. Are there any questions on 552?
Yes, I would. This is Issa again from Domtar. Just one question about if we have different legal entities under a parent company. Some of last year, the way I looked at it, some of my legal entities did not match the threshold, but some others did, and I filed for the ones that did. You comment on that?
Yes, I'm going to double check this, but my recollection on this is that if you choose to file on a corporate level, then everything in the company has to be reported. But if you choose to file on an affiliate by affiliate basis, then you're fine with picking and choosing. What you can't do, I believe, is try to roll it up to a corporate number and then through that pick and choose. So I think you're fine on that, but I will double check on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
This is Mike Colwell, Smurf at Stone. You indicated it would be helpful to file some comments by tomorrow. How do you suggest going about doing that?
If you've got some, hi Mike, how are you?
Good.
If you have some particular data that you'd be willing to share on a no-name basis, we are drafting comments for PGC, and we'd be happy to include that in the data that we're submitting on behalf of PGC.
Okay.
That just, how much time you spent on it and how much of that was cash out and that sort of thing. If you want to file your own individual comments, you can certainly do that fairly easily, and again, we'd be happy to help you offline on that.
Okay.
This is Geneva Richards with PepsiCo, and I hold it for all of the PepsiCo last year, and so I could give you some feedback on that. Worst endeavor.
That was a pain in the neck, right?
Yeah. Luckily, though, for us, I mean, if we didn't have a third party that processed all of our utility bills so that they're all in one site where you can get to them, it would have been impossible.
Huh.
You have to virtually look at every invoice. Then it's really fun if you have vendors who estimate bill and then they put up the next period. So that's really a nightmare.
The kind of detail that I think FERC is looking for, because I don't think that they understand that.
It was a lot of work for really nothing.
Right.
Because we didn't even have to, like I said, at the end of the day, it was all zero because we didn't meet the threshold.
Right. I want to go back to a question that was asked earlier from Dar about the aggregation. Don't get the what I call the short form on blanket sales certificates. You know, regardless of the 2.2 million MMBTU threshold, you still need to consider whether you're making sales under a blanket. So even if you are not aggregating for your legal entities, you still have to report whether you're making sales under the blanket.
Yeah, we did that for every entity, for every legal.
Any further questions on 5.2? Let's switch gears here and talk about my recent favorite subject, which is Section 5 cases. Jack and I are heavily immersed in these cases. I want to say at the outset that we're going to talk a little bit about the process and the background and where these cases stand. To the extent that there are settlement negotiations that are ongoing, we can't talk about the details of any of those negotiations or even sort of the process of where they stand, because all of those internal deliberations are protected by Rule 602 of the Commission's Rules of Practice and Procedure. So we can talk generally about what happens in a settlement, and I want to talk specifically about what I call the thermonuclear bomb that the pipelines have, but we're not going to be able to talk about the details of any ongoing settlement discussion. The background here is that under the Natural Gas Act, transportation rates for the interstate pipelines charge are supposed to be just and reasonable. And as many of you know, back in the day before Order 636, the pipelines had to come in every 3 years and have their rates reviewed to make sure that they continued to be just and reasonable. With 636 and unbundling, that requirement went away. So as we sit here today, if a pipeline wants to come in and ask the Commission for approval to increase its rates, it can do so. But nothing that requires the pipeline to have its rates reviewed. The only way that a pipeline can be forced to have FERC look at its rates is that a complaining party, a shipper, such as those of you on this call, creates a complaint, or the Commission, on its own motion, institutes a complaint because it believes that the pipeline's rates may not be just and reasonable. The Natural Gas Supply Association, for many years now, has been conducting a study based on some publicly available data that the pipelines have to file. And that publicly available data has led NGSA to conclude there are quite a few pipelines, interstate natural gas pipeline community, that are over-recovering their allowed return. And what that means in plain English is they're making too much money. They're allowed to earn a certain profit level in their rate. It's built in. They've got a guaranteed profit level of 10 or 11 or 12%. Now, I'm sure many of your companies would be very happy to have a guaranteed profit level of 10 or 11, 12%, and you probably don't have that. But the pipelines do. They are monopolies. They're regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the amount of profit they can make is set. Over time, for a variety of factors, maybe they are pushing more gas through their pipelines. Maybe they become more efficient. After a while, these rates become stale, and what had previously been a just and reasonable rate can turn into a rate that is no longer just and reasonable. Again, in plain English, means that you as a shipper are paying too much to transport your gas on these pipelines. We are working with NGSA and others for several years to try to get the Commission to open up investigations of some of the pipeline companies that we call the most egregious over-earners, the people whose average return on equity is 20% or 29% or 34%, and some very large number of their allowed return of 10 or 11%. A couple of years ago, FERC improved the Form 2 data, this publicly available data. They improved the data. They made the pipelines file more data, made it easier for FERC to look at the data, and easier for FERC to analyze it. So finally, in November of this year, FERC launched November of 2009, and we haven't seen November of 2010 yet, have we? November of 2009, FERC launched 3 separate investigations into the rates of Northern Natural, Lakes, and NGPL in order to figure out whether those companies' rates are too high. According to staff's analysis, return on equity in 2008 for those pipelines was 24% for Northern, 20% for Great Lakes, and 24.5% for NGPL. NGPL, there is also the added issue of fuel. NGPL, according to NGSA's analysis and also according to FERC's analysis, made a tremendous amount of money on fuel. And according to FERC's case precedent, fuel is not supposed to be a profit center for the pipeline. This was a series of historic orders in that it's the first time in over 20 years that FERC has used its Section 5 authority to do an investigation into the rates of a pipeline or storage operator. We were very happy to see this done. Questions that we've gotten quite a few times is, what's going to happen going forward? Is this the tip of the iceberg? Is FERC going to continue to investigate other pipelines that are on NGSA's hit parade of over-earners? And the real answer to that is we don't know yet. When FERC opened up these investigations, statements made at the Commission meeting and the statements made by the chairman indicate that this was not the end, that Commission staff may be in the future charged with the task of viewing this data, and there was some, from my point of view, hope held out that this not be the end of it, that the Commission would continue to review pipeline rates, and if they had a question about them, would implement additional Section 5 cases in the future. One very important part of what happens in a Section 5 case is that FERC does not have any refund authority. What it means is that in these Section 5 cases, if at the end of the day, FERC decides that the existing rates on these pipelines are way too high, you don't get refunds. The rate relief that you as a shipper get is prospective only. That means from the date of final Commission order saying, well, the rate has been $5 and it should be $3, you get that new $3 rate. But back in time, you do not get any refund from the difference from $5 to $3 for however long you've been paying the now too high that has been found unjust and unreasonable. This is in my view and in PGC's view, a fundamental problem with the Natural Gas Act. There is no ability to provide any sort of refund. There are a number of entities, companies, trade associations that have been working very hard on the Hill in the past couple of years to try to change the Natural Gas Act so that FERC would have refund authority. Senator Maria Cantwell from Washington State, the Democrat, has been at the forefront of leading the charge on the Hill to try to get this change made. there is an energy bill or a climate change bill that comes to the floor of the Senate, we expect that and hope that she would offer that as an amendment. There's a real disconnect here between the Federal Power Act and the Natural Gas Act. The Federal Power Act was amended several years ago, I think in about 1988, to allow FERC refund authority on the electricity side. The Federal Power Act and the Natural Gas Act are considered sort of sister statutes, and there's case law out there that says that and interprets similar provisions similarly. As the Federal Power Act has been amended to provide refunds to ratepayers on the electricity side, we don't have that capability on the gas side. All the sitting commissioners, as well as our immediate past chairman, Mr. Kelleher, are in favor of Section 5 reform. This is not, at least as the Commission's view, a partisan issue at all. Democratic commissioners and Republican commissioners alike have decided that this is something that needs to happen. The real benefit, in our view, of Section 5 reform is that it provides an incentive for the pipelines to come to the table and negotiate. In the current structure of Section 5, if a pipeline wants to negotiate a settlement, well, it certainly can, but it is incentivized to drag out the process, because for every day that a Section 5 complaint case goes forward, that's another day, arguably, that the pipeline is able to keep higher rates in effect and put more money in its pocket. It is an economic issue in that you don't get the refunds, but the real problem with the lack of refund authority that FERC has is that the incentives, or the lack of incentives for the pipeline to come to the table and negotiate. But turning to the specific cases that we've got here, this happened, a process was pipelines were required to file cost and revenue studies. They really complained about having to do that. The FERC made them do it anyway. The Section 5 cost and revenue studies that they were required to file were supposed to reflect their actual costs, looking in the rearview mirror, if you will. All three of the pipelines made adjustments to the data, and there were significant adjustments. And what they uniformly said was, well, sort of regardless of what's gone on in the past, there's things that are going on in the future that is going to change this. And so even, they didn't say it the way I'm going to say it, but effectively they're saying, even if we made a lot of money in the past, that's not relevant because Rex has come online, or Marcellus shale plays have become more important, or today's Thursday at 2:30 in the afternoon Eastern, and things have changed and things are different going forward. So if we were going to come in and file for use, we'd be filing for a rate increase, not a rate decrease. That's really the gist of a lot of the pipeline's arguments. You can probably tell by my tone of voice that I'm not buying this. All three cases were set for hearing, with the hearings to begin on a fast track in August of 2010. As I said earlier, we really can't talk about any of the specifics of settlement, but Commissioner Spitzer asked that all of the cases attempt a settlement, that all the parties in all the cases attempt a settlement. And you can see from what's in the public record that settlement discussions have been held. As we sit here today, there have been some extensions requested and filed and granted in some of the cases. NGPL staff filed a motion for a 2-week extension of the procedural schedule, and that was granted, right? That was granted, Jack, right? Yeah. Yeah. NGPL, the extension has been requested, and the answers are due on that motion tomorrow. So we'll find out tomorrow whether that procedural schedule will be extended. The reason for that extension is that the staff represented that there are ongoing settlement discussions and that the parties need more time to deliberate on settlement. In Northern Natural, that case has been extended, so negotiations by what is available in the public record are ongoing. According to what's in the public record on Great Lakes, that one's on track to proceed. So that's what we know. But I want to point out one important factor that the pipelines have, an important weapon. I called it the thermonuclear option earlier. It's the important weapon that the pipelines have in their arsenal to effectively moot a Section 5. And I know this, talk about in the weeds on FERC, this is really down on the weeds, but it's really important. If, for example, if you look on the chart on your screen, the $2, and this is not any particular pipeline's rates. This is just pulled out of my head. Say, for example, the pipeline is currently charging $2 as its maximum rate. What if, by analyzing the Form 2 data or whatever else you can come up with, you believe that the really just and reasonable rate is $1? That's what you ought to be paying. So you either get FERC to initiate a Section 5 case, or you as a shipper initiate a Section 5 case to get that rate from $2 down to $1. That's what your target is. All right, time goes on. Now, even an expedited schedule, these Section 5 cases don't go quickly. It goes on, and the pipeline says, okay, you don't settle, we're going to file a Section 4 case right on top of this ongoing Section 5. What happens as a matter of how the Natural Gas Act operates and the FERC regulations is that, say, pipeline files to increase its rate to $3. After a fairly short suspension period, that new rate goes into effect. Now, if later on I don't know what that was, but I'm going to keep going. Whatever is going on here, if you ultimately sell that case at $2.50, or you litigate it out to the end, and the FERC finds that the new rate is $2.50. The only refund that you get, assuming this case was started in the middle of the Section 5 case, is down to what is called the last clean rate. And the last clean rate is that $2 maximum rate. So effectively, the pipelines have taken off the table all of money that you thought you were fighting for in the difference between the $1, what you believe to be the just and reasonable rate, and the $2 maximum rate. The only thing that you can get once that Section 4 case is filed, assuming Section 5 case has not been completed, is refunds back down to the last clean rate of $2. What this means is that in any settlement discussion of a Section 5 case, the thermonuclear option that the pipelines have is settle this case now, or we, the pipeline, are going to pancake a Section 4 case on top of it. It's an extremely powerful tool in the pipeline set of weapons, and it is something that we can't fix other than fixing Section 5. If there were a refund possibility under Section 5, we could fix it, or that would fix it. If the FERC would come in immediately after a Section 5 case is initiated and lower the rate to, $1.50 or something like that, that would help as well. But as we stand here today, we don't see the Commission coming in and lowering the rates immediately. And you can bet in settlement discussions you will hear pipelines threaten to file Section 4s. So that's where we stand today. It's too early to tell, based on what we can see in the public and what we're allowed to talk about, how these cases are going to come out. But in my view, the bottom line here is that we need to reform Section 5. It's terrific that the Commission has taken it upon itself to prosecute these Section 5 cases. I think that's a huge step in the right direction. I don't think it's enough. I think we all need to go to the Hill and try to get Section 5 reformed. Are any questions about Section 5 and any of these cases? There's a question here about a gas daily report on the dispute between FERC staff and the ALJ on the Section 5 pipeline complaint. And the question is what's going on here and who's likely to prevail. I think they finally settled that. The person who asked me that question, I will get back to you individually, but I believe that the FERC staff and the ALJ, I think I saw an email today that they had settled that. But essentially this, down in the weeds, this one was down in the weeds too. This was a dispute over whether FERC staff had to provide a privilege log for documents that it was refusing to turn over in discovery to the pipeline. The pines in all of these cases been trying to get at data and analysis that's underlying FERC's decision to go forward with these Section 5 cases in the first place. And that's the heart of that dispute between FERC staff and the pipeline. But stay tuned, more to come. By the time you may be going to GasMart, by the time we're at GasMart, we'll have more updated information for you on FERC Form 552. Hopefully by then the Commission will have decided what it's going to do to modify this form, and procedurally the Section 5 cases will be further along. Other questions? We want to thank you for joining us today for this update on 552 and the pending Section 5 cases. If you have any questions on any of the material covered, you can contact either Jack or me. And if we piqued your interest on filing comments on FERC Form 552, we're happy to include your data anonymously, of course, in any of the materials that we submit to FERC on behalf of PGC, and we'd be happy to chat with you about Section 5 to the extent that we can, given the strictures of the settlement rules and regulations. But with that, we will stop, and thank you very much for joining us, and hope to see you at GasMart in Chicago in May. Take care, all.